September 13th, 1862, Frederick, Maryland. Late morning. The field smells of trampled grass and cold ash. The Confederate Army of Northern Virginia camped here 2 days ago, and they left in the way that armies on the move always leave, in a hurry and without apology. The ground is littered with the debris of their passage: discarded tin cans, broken straps, gnawed corn cobs, the cold remains of a dozen fires. The men of the 27th Indiana Infantry move through this abandoned campsite in the September heat, rifles slung, eyes scanning the ground out of habit more than purpose. They are following Lee's army through Maryland, part of a vast federal column pushing north and west into enemy-held country. Private Barton Mitchell stops walking. Something on the ground is catching his eye. A small folded packet of paper lying in the grass beside a fence corner, as if it was dropped by accident or left in haste or simply forgotten by a man who had too much to carry and not enough time to keep track of everything. It is wrapped around 3 cigars. Mitchell picks it up. He looks at the cigars, then he looks at the paper. He unfolds it carefully. He reads the heading. He reads the date, September 9th, 1862. He reads the words, Headquarters, Army of Northern Virginia. He reads a name he does not recognize at the top of the page, a name that will mean nothing to him but will mean everything to the general who reads it next. Special Orders, number 191. Mitchell does not understand what he is holding, but Sergeant John Bloss, standing next to him, does. Bloss reads faster. His eyes move down the page, and what he reads makes him go very still in the way a man goes still when he understands that something has changed around him, that the world has shifted slightly on its axis without making a sound. He looks at Mitchell. They need to find an officer, right now, to understand why 3 cigars and a piece of paper found in a Maryland field might end the Civil War. You have to understand the autumn of 1862 and the specific, terrifying gamble that Robert E. Lee was making with the survival of the Confederacy. Lee has spent the summer of 1862 doing what seemed impossible. He took command of the Confederate Army outside Richmond in June, renamed it the Army of Northern Virginia, and proceeded to spend 4 months running George McClellan off the Virginia Peninsula, defeating John Pope at Second Bull Run, and pushing the Union Army back to Washington in something close to a rout. By September 1862, the momentum of the war has swung so completely toward the Confederacy that European diplomats in London and Paris are seriously discussing formal recognition of the Confederate States of America as an independent nation. One more dramatic Confederate victory on northern soil might bring England and France into the war on the side of the South. If that happens, the Union cannot win. The mathematics are simple and brutal. Lee knows this. Jefferson Davis knows this. The Confederacy's window is open, and it will not stay open forever. Lee decides to push through it. He takes the Army of Northern Virginia across the Potomac River into Maryland. 40,000 men, ragged and barefoot and hungry, singing Maryland, My Maryland as they wade the river, their shoes held above their heads, the water cold in the September morning. It is an audacious, breathtaking gamble. They are in enemy territory. They are outnumbered. Their supply lines are essentially non-existent. But the risk has a logic. A Confederate army on northern soil, threatening Baltimore and Washington, would shatter northern morale. The midterm elections are 6 weeks away. A panicked electorate might vote in a Congress willing to negotiate a peace. Lincoln is already under political siege. The pressure would become unbearable. There is only one problem with the plan. Before Lee can maneuver through Maryland and Pennsylvania, he has to deal with a Confederate garrison at Harper's Ferry, where the Shenandoah Valley meets the Potomac. Harper's Ferry sits astride his supply line and his line of retreat. He cannot leave 12,000 Union soldiers at his rear. They have to be dealt with. So Lee does what Lee does. He splits his army. He divides his force into 5 separate columns, operating independently across a wide front of Maryland countryside. Stonewall Jackson takes 3 columns to surround and capture Harper's Ferry. James Longstreet takes the main body toward Hagerstown. D.H. Hill covers the rear passes through South Mountain. The pieces are scattered across 60 miles of hostile territory, and for this operation to succeed, each piece must move in precise sequence according to a specific timetable. Lee writes it all down: the plan, the columns, the routes, the objectives, the timetable. He writes it in exquisite detail because every commander must know exactly what everyone else is doing in order for this complex, interlocking operation to work. He issues it as Special Orders number 191 on September 9, 1862. Copies of Special Order 191 go to every division commander in the Army of Northern Virginia. They are carried by staff couriers on horseback to their recipients. Every copy is accounted for. Every commander receives his orders. The machinery of the operation begins to turn. Except one copy never arrives. Or if it arrives, the man it is addressed to loses it, or never reads it, or sets it down somewhere and walks away. General D.H. Hill, commanding the rear guard, later insists he never received his copy. Nobody ever conclusively determines what happened. The copy addressed to Hill ends up lying in the grass of a Maryland field beside a fence corner, wrapped around 3 cigars. And 4 days later, a private from Indiana picks it up. The paper travels up the chain of command at speed, from Mitchell to Bloss to their regimental commander to their brigade commander, and within an hour it arrives at the headquarters of Colonel Samuel Pittman, a staff officer in the headquarters of General George McClellan, who commands the Army of the Potomac, the Union's primary fighting force, currently on the march into Maryland in pursuit of Lee. Pittman reads the order. He recognizes the handwriting. Before the war, Pittman served with D.H. Hill at a Western Army post. He knows Hill's handwriting as well as he knows his own. He does not hesitate. He takes the order to McClellan. George Brinton McClellan is, in the fall of 1862, one of the most celebrated and most frustrating figures in the entire American military establishment. He is 35 years old. He is impeccably educated, second in his class at West Point. He is a brilliant administrator who built the Army of the Potomac from a rabble of panicked volunteers after the disaster of First Bull Run into the finest military organization on the continent. His soldiers worship him. They call him Little Mac. They cheer when he rides down the line. He is handsome, polished, and utterly convinced of his own genius. He is also, underneath all of it, afraid. McClellan has spent his entire tenure in command operating under the shadow of a belief that he cannot shake and that no amount of intelligence reports can dislodge. He believes Lee outnumbers him. He believes Lee is a military Superman, a figure of almost supernatural tactical ability, capable of moves that defy anticipation. He believes the Confederates have 100,000 men, 200,000 men, numbers that his own intelligence system, run by the detective Allan Pinkerton, consistently inflates through a methodology so flawed it amounts to fantasy. McClellan has 48 hours of intelligence in his hands at any given moment, suggesting that Lee has twice the men he actually has, and he has walked through every battle of the past year half convinced that the army facing him is an invincible giant. The result is a command style of excruciating caution. McClellan plans brilliantly. He maneuvers with skill, then he stops. He waits. He asks for more troops. He writes to Washington about the overwhelming forces arrayed against him. He is always almost ready, always nearly set to deliver the decisive blow, always 6 days away from doing the thing he was sent to do. Lincoln has a word for it. He calls it the slows. Now, Pittman puts Special Orders number 191 on McClellan's desk. McClellan reads it. He reads it again. The room around him is very quiet. His staff officers watch his face. What they see happen on it is something none of them will quite be able to describe precisely later, because it involves the collapse and reconstruction of a man's entire psychological framework in the space of 30 seconds. For months, McClellan has been chasing a ghost, an all-powerful Confederate army that exists mostly in his own imagination. Now he is holding a document that reduces that ghost to arithmetic. Lee's army is split into 5 pieces scattered across 60 miles of Maryland countryside. Each piece is alone. The columns are separated by mountain passes. If McClellan moves fast, if he drives his columns through those mountain passes before Lee can reunite his forces, he can destroy the Army of Northern Virginia in detail. Piece by piece, column by column. He can hit each piece before it can reach the others. He can do in 48 hours what has taken 2 years to dream of. He can end the war. McClellan stands up. His staff officers say he waves the paper in the air. He is almost vibrating. He reportedly says, to those standing around him, in a voice that carries the particular exhilaration of a man holding a royal flush, "Here is a paper with which if I cannot whip Bobby Lee, I will be willing to go home." He writes to Lincoln with a giddiness that is utterly foreign to his usual measured, formal dispatches. "I have the whole rebel force in front of me, but am confident, and no time shall be lost. I think Lee has made a gross mistake and that he will be severely punished for it." He promises Lincoln the most decisive action. He promises that Lee's army will be destroyed. He writes with a certainty and a bravado that must have been extraordinary relief to a president who has watched this general do everything except fight. Then McClellan puts the paper down, and he waits. 12 noon. The order is in his hands. 1 p.m., 2 p.m. The September afternoon slides by. The Army of the Potomac sits in its camps. The soldiers rest. The horses stand in their lines. 3 p.m. The shadows lengthen. 4 p.m., 5 p.m. The sun is beginning its descent toward the western mountains. Lee's army is out there, scattered, vulnerable, waiting to be destroyed by a man who has just been handed the key to the war. 6 p.m. McClellan issues his marching orders. Not immediate, urgent, crashing through the mountains orders. Cautious, methodical, tomorrow morning orders. The columns will begin moving at dawn. They will proceed with care. They will maintain their distances and their flanks. The Army of the Potomac begins its movement not like a man who has just discovered his enemy's secret, but like a man who has been reminded to keep his powder dry. The delay has been roughly 18 hours from discovery to meaningful movement. Somewhere in Maryland on the evening of September 13th, at a campfire near Hagerstown, a Confederate cavalry officer delivers a message to Robert E. Lee. The message comes from a man named James J. White, a Southern sympathizer who was present at McClellan's headquarters when Special Orders No. 191 arrived, who read the excitement in the faces of the Federal staff officers, who understood in an instant what had happened. He rode hard and fast for the Confederate lines. Lee reads the message. He sets it down. The fire pops. The horses shift in the dark. The composed marble face of the Virginia Cavalier shows something that the men near him have almost never seen. Something cold and sudden moves through his features. He knows that his entire battle plan is in the hands of his enemy. He knows that the most dangerous gamble of his career has just become catastrophically more dangerous. He immediately begins issuing orders to concentrate his scattered columns as fast as they can move. Jackson must take Harper's Ferry and then come north. Longstreet must come back from Hagerstown. Hill must hold the passes through South Mountain as long as possible. Every available man must move tonight, tomorrow, without rest, without stopping, and pray that the Union general takes his time. It is here that the psychology of McClellan saves the Army of Northern Virginia. Because McClellan does take his time. His advance the next morning, September 14th, pushes through the gaps in South Mountain against D.H. Hill's Confederate rear guard. But it does so with the grinding, methodical pressure of a general who does not believe in urgency, who is always worried that what looks like opportunity is actually a trap. The fighting at South Mountain is real and costly, but it is slow. It is measured. It lacks the explosive, crashing momentum of an army that knows its enemy is vulnerable and has perhaps 48 hours to exploit that vulnerability before the window closes. On the morning of September 15th, Harper's Ferry falls to Jackson. 12,000 Union soldiers surrender. It is the largest surrender of Union troops in the entire Civil War. Jackson begins moving his divisions north to join Lee. Lee concentrates his army near the town of Sharpsburg, Maryland, with his back to the Potomac River. He has perhaps 40,000 men. McClellan has nearly 90,000. Lee is on ground of his enemy's choosing, with a river behind him and a vastly superior force in front. By any military logic, the battle should last one afternoon and produce a Confederate catastrophe. September 17, 1862, the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest single day in the history of American warfare. McClellan's plan is sound on paper. He will attack both flanks simultaneously and then drive through the Confederate center. But the execution is sequential where it should be simultaneous, and cautious where it needs to be crushing. The right attacks first. Hooker's corps drives into the Confederate left in the cornfield, a morning assault of extraordinary savagery where the fighting is so intense that the standing corn is cut down by musket fire as if mowed by a scythe. 30 minutes of the cornfield produces 12,000 casualties, nearly 6,000 per side. The ground changes hands 15 times in 90 minutes. Then the center, the sunken road that becomes Bloody Lane. Confederate infantry from D.H. Hill's division stand in a natural trench formed by an eroded farm lane and hold it against assault after assault for 3 hours. The dead pile in the lane so thickly that the bodies form a new wall of flesh. Union soldiers finally flank the position and break it, and for 20 minutes, Lee's center is wide open. The Confederate line has a gap you could drive a division through. If McClellan commits his reserves, if he sends in the 20,000 fresh soldiers he has been holding back all morning, the Army of Northern Virginia splits in half and the survivors drown in the Potomac. McClellan does not send in his reserves. He believes, because he always believes, that Lee has fresh troops waiting in the wings. He believes the gap is a trap. He holds his 20,000 men back while the Confederates scramble to plug the hole with whatever scraps they can find. The hole closes. In the afternoon, the Union left crosses Antietam Creek over a stone bridge, 900 Confederates holding off 12,000 Union soldiers for 3 hours in a piece of tactical defensive brilliance. But the bridge falls at last, and the Burnside's corps pushes into Lee's right flank, threatening to cut off the Confederate line of retreat to the Potomac. The Confederate line is bending. Another push, and it breaks. Then A.P. Hill arrives. He has marched 17 miles from Harper's Ferry in 7 hours. His men falling out of the column by the hundreds from exhaustion. The ones who make it arrive at the exact moment the Confederate right is collapsing. They crash into Burnside's exposed flank and throw him back. The Confederate line stabilizes. The sun goes down. 23,000 men are casualties in a single day. More Americans die at Antietam on September 17, 1862, than die in the entire War of 1812 and the Mexican War combined. The blood pools in the furrows of the cornfield. It fills the sunken road to the brim. The creek runs a color that the soldiers who see it never try to describe to their families in letters home, because no combination of words adequately captures it. Lee holds his ground on September 18th. He is daring McClellan to attack again, blood still seeping from his decimated regiments back against the river, his reserves gone. McClellan does not attack. He is convinced Lee is going to attack him. He spends the day reorganizing, regrouping, planning. Lee uses the day to slip his army back across the Potomac under cover of night, back into Virginia, back to safety. McClellan lets him go. Lincoln reads the dispatches from the battlefield. He sees the casualty numbers. He sees that Lee has escaped. He sends a gentle, agonized letter to McClellan. Are you not overcautious when you assume that you cannot do what the enemy is always doing? He visits the army in person, travels to the battlefield, walks through the fields of the dead, and watches McClellan show him the perfectly arranged, impeccably positioned, and completely stationary Army of the Potomac. Lincoln reportedly stares at the vast encampment and asks one of his aides what he is looking at. His aide says, "The Army of the Potomac, Mr. President." Lincoln says no, that is General McClellan's bodyguard. He relieves McClellan of command on November 7, 1862. But before he does one more thing. He takes Antietam, the bloodiest and most inconclusive battle in the history of the Western Hemisphere, and he uses it. He has been waiting for a Union victory to announce the Emancipation Proclamation, something he has been drafting in private since the summer, something he knows will transform the war from a fight to restore the Union into a fight to end slavery, something that will make European recognition of the Confederacy politically impossible and morally toxic. Antietam is not exactly a victory. Lee retreated, which is close enough. On September 22, 1862, 5 days after the bloodiest day in American history, Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. The war changes forever. It is no longer a constitutional argument about states' rights. It is now a moral reckoning about human freedom. England and France, both deeply hostile to slavery in their domestic politics, find the prospect of openly supporting the Confederacy suddenly, irreversibly poisoned. The diplomatic window that Lee's Maryland campaign was designed to force open slams shut and locks. The 3 cigars and the piece of paper that Private Barton Mitchell found in a Maryland field changed the Civil War in ways that stretch in 2 directions at once, and both directions are shot through with the particular tragedy of squandered potential. In one direction, the Lost Order broke Lee's gamble. It exposed the most dangerous vulnerability in the Confederate plan and handed McClellan the information he needed to destroy the Army of Northern Virginia before it could concentrate. It was the kind of intelligence windfall that generals dream about and never receive. It was everything. It was, as McClellan himself said, a paper with which a general ought to be able to whip Bobby Lee and go home. In the other direction, McClellan threw it away. Not with a dramatic gesture or a colossal mistake, but with the slow, grinding, methodical hesitation that had defined his entire career, the deep-seated inability to believe that what looked like an opportunity was actually an opportunity and not a trap. He had 18 hours in which the Confederate Army was scattered and vulnerable. He used those 18 hours the way he used every hour of his command, carefully, cautiously, and almost correctly, almost. The Lost Order is the great hinge of the Civil War's middle years. If McClellan moves at midnight on September 13th, if he crashes his columns through the South Mountain gaps in the dark with the urgency the moment demands, Lee's divided army cannot concentrate in time. The piecemeal destruction of the Army of Northern Virginia is not a fantasy. It is an arithmetic certainty. The war ends not in April 1865, but in the autumn of 1862. 3 more years of killing, 300,000 more deaths, 400,000 more widows, the burning of Atlanta, the trenches of Petersburg, the hunger of Andersonville, the charred ruins of the Shenandoah Valley. All of it sits on the other side of an 18-hour delay. The greatest military intelligence coup in American history was matched almost perfectly by the greatest failure of military nerve. The information was flawless. The man who received it was not. Lincoln understood this. Grant, when he read about it later, understood it. The soldiers who survived Antietam understood it, though they might not have been able to articulate exactly what they understood. They had fought on a day so bloody that the ground itself seemed to change color, and they knew the battle had not ended the way it should have ended, the way it could have ended, because somewhere in the chain between the finding of the paper and the fighting of the battle, the human element had failed. Barton Mitchell found the cigars. He found the paper. He did exactly what a soldier is supposed to do. He picked it up. He carried it forward. He put it in the right hands. His part of the story is clean and simple and completely blameless. What happened to the paper after that is the Civil War's most enduring lesson about the difference between having the advantage and using it, between knowing the enemy's secret and having the will to act on it before the secret expires. 3 cigars in the Maryland grass, a piece of paper that contained the architecture of Confederate defeat, already built, already designed, already waiting. A general who read it, understood it, celebrated it, and then went to sleep. The Army of Northern Virginia marched back across the Potomac, scarred and bloodied but alive, and the war went on for 3 more years. The paper still exists. It is preserved in the collections of the National Archives in Washington. You can look at it through glass. The handwriting is clear and precise, written in the confident hand of a Confederate staff officer who thought the envelope was going where it was supposed to go. You can read the orders. You can read the columns and the routes and the objectives and the timetable. You can read everything that should have ended the war, everything that didn't.